Hi everyone, it's me again. Welcome to week 2 of stress management. So this week we are going to talk instead of what is stress, we are going to talk about what is well-being, what is health, and some of the history a little bit behind that question. So let's get started. So last week we talked a lot about what is stress? What does that look like? This week, what is health? So think about that for a moment. How do you define health? One of the first things you have to do in this course is to create your own sort of wellness philosophy based on what you have thought up until now. And you will, at the end of the course, be asked to revise that and look at it again. And so this is kind of where we can start doing that. What is health? How has it been sort of defined through the ages? So what do you think it is? And where do you think health resides inside us? How do we find it? How do we have it? What does that even mean? So let's look at this question first. The word health from Old English, I don't know how you say that, health or hal, meaning a wholeness, a being whole, sound, or well. So I think that gives us our first ideas, right? It's that there is something integrative, the word whole, bringing about the idea, not just pointing to one thing, but an integration of sorts. But let's look at the history of this question. So let's go way back to the 1500s and Rene Descartes, and that is Newton, who's kind of a follower of this idea. Descartes coined something that we call dualism, and it's the idea that the mind and the body are separate, that they are not integrated or together at all. So this creates what we honestly have seen in our medical world for a very long time. This has been the basis of it for a long time. The biomedical mechanistic model. The idea that the body is separate from the mind, so there are not mental components to wellness or the health of the body, and that we look at that illness is only caused by physical agents, viruses. Oh my goodness, I do know how to spell bacteria. I'm sorry, I'll fix that. Um, and so the body is like a machine that it can be fixed, reduced to its parts. It's very reductionistic, defines health as absence of disease. And disease is defined through, things wrong with our organs and things that have been caused like that. And so we look for how to fix that, and that is it. So health is really about the maintaining health in the systems of the body. And it's only caused by kind of mechanistic physical agents like that. So I think you kind of probably get that idea. So then we have in the 1900s, middle of the 1900s, comes along kind of a different idea, the biopsychosocial idea. And I'm probably in the way of this, so I'll just put myself up here. It is more integrative. So it sees health as impacted by the whole system, mind, body, emotion, society, spirit. Health is on a continuum. So it's not like you have health over here and you have disease over here, or sickness over here, not health over here. One is not the opposite of the other, but there is a continuum based on the well-being of all of those different systems. That it is more than the sum of its parts. It links science and humanism. So why I say that is in psychology, that's we got three guys up here. We have Einstein, who looked for a wholeness to the universe in a way, something that explained how everything fit together. We have George Engel, who came up with this sort of beginning of this biopsychosocial idea within medicine. And we have Abraham Maslow, who was one of the fathers of humanism in psychology. And he looked at an integration of systems for health and well-being. For many, many years, psychology was only based on what is wrong with us, a little like medicine, and that's what the dualism and kind of the mechanistic model look at is what is wrong with you? How are you sick? Now let's make you well by looking at the symptoms of your body and let's fix those. So this approach says that we have biological, psychological, and sociological factors, everything working together. And it's not just, like you can take a part out of a car, fix it, put it back in the car, and everything works. That is much more integrative than that, much more holistic than that. And Maslow saw that in terms of the body-mind connection. So that is where we're getting away from the idea of dualism, and that we have a holistic approach where the body and the mind um, impact one another. Okay. And so now we're going to move into something, Antonovsky's salutogenic model. And I like this. And so I'd like you to just spend a little time with me here on this. So Aaron Antonovsky, born in 1923, was a medical sociologist, and he was looking for the right questions. Now, and when the right questions were not, what makes you sick necessarily for him, but what is health? What brings about health? He was interested in how we move towards health regardless of our circumstances. So he was doing a study with women in Israel, some things around menopause. And what he found, he had like a group that had all been in concentration camps, these women, and found that they were able to maintain a sense of health in even when things were bad. So how do we move towards health even when our circumstances are not good and are stressful? So there's a quote here: "We are coming to understand health not as the absence of disease, but rather as the process by which individuals maintain their sense of coherence." Now we're going to talk about this idea of coherence because it's really big within the salutogenic model. Sense that life is comprehensible, that we understand it, that it's manageable, that we have some control, and that it's meaningful. An ability to function in the face of changes in themselves and their relationships with the environment. He focused on what people do to promote health rather than on risk factors for illness, create health ease rather than disease, asked what are the origins of health, which is what salutogenesis is, genesis being origin, saw people like all living organisms as moving toward entropy and stressors and tensions that, depending on how managed, move us toward either entropy or salutary. I don't know what my spelling problem is. That's supposed to be beneficial for health. Oh well, I'm learning what I have to fix here. On the PowerPoint, I'm not redoing the whole videos. So this is a quote, and I'm actually going to get rid of myself here for a second. This is a long quote about his thing, and it's okay. I am going to read it, pick it apart a little bit, because I think it has some really good information in it. In his books, Antonovsky introduces the fundamental philosophical view of the human organism as prototypically being in the state of heterostatic disequilibrium as the heart of the salutogenic orientation. Now, that means there's always this idea that we are always, what we want is homeostasis, and that we are looking for homeostasis, and that the system is always moving in that direction. And that is the norm. That homeostasis is our norm. Homeostasis given to us by Walter Cannon, as we talked about in last week. So Hans Selye, who we also talked about last week, gave us this idea of heterostatic. And that just meaning that an example of heterostatic is that the body produces a fever, something necessarily not good, in order to fight the flu. So it's looking for growth in the midst of trouble to some extent, and may create things that don't do that. So what this basically all means is that he came to understand that disease, illness, and entropy being a decline to disorder, are the norm. That kind of disequilibrium is our norm, not balance and homeostasis, so they are the norm rather than the exception to a rule of otherwise self-regulated homeostatic processes occasionally being disrupted with resulting pathology. He found it, so all of that coming to say that he found it to be futile to try to understand and control every single factor that might lead to this or that particular disease. A more fruitful approach would be to focus on what he found to be the overall problem of active adaptation to an environment in which stressors are omnipresent and inevitable. So basically, we are always going to have stress. We are always going to have things that are challenging. And what's important to look at is how individuals and groups, like people within concentration camps, a group he studied, can adapt to those circumstances in order to still have a sense of coherence rather than getting rid of circumstances that cause us stress. He presented the term negative entropy, in which the goal was to search for useful inputs to our sociocultural context, which we'll talk about, the physical environment, and into the organism down to the cellular level to counter the normal tendency of entropy. So entropy, moving towards entropy is normal, but that we have to find inputs that help us to counter that. So negative entropy, or negentropy, as he termed it, is something positive. In his efforts to study health instead of disease, Antrovsky coined his famous new word, salutogenesis, of the origins of health, the intriguing question being, what are the origins of health? Okay, so I hope some of that makes sense. So continuing with his model, I'll bring myself back, but I'll move myself over. Stressors are everywhere. These are just some of the main ideas here. Oops, am I gone? There I am. I think I froze for a minute. Stressors are everywhere, and adaptation is required to make order out of chaos. We have to adapt to the circumstances. The circumstances aren't really ever going to be in perfect balance. Adaptation is done by finding inputs, as that quote talked about, from both internal and external resources that relieve pressure on us. And he called these generalized resistance resources, so GRR. So those include personal reserves like optimism, resilience, agility. We need to grow those. We need to create those within our own being. We look for them in our social environment in the terms of our relationships, and in our physical environment, things that bring us a sense of peace and equanimity to some extent, money, possessions, things. So there's a balance of all these things. And the belief that GRRs, what we have of these, shapes our worldview, and that is our sense of coherence. And it becomes a stable aspect of our personality, he believed, by early adulthood. So our sense of coherence is composed of three factors that are influenced by our experiences. So what we come to, our sense of coherence, our personal sense of coherence, based on these three things, our reserves, our environment, physical and social, and internal, based on our experience, based on three factors. So those factors are comprehensibility, the degree to which we can make cognitive sense of stimuli we perceive. So it relies on a predictability of our experiences. Can we make sense of our experiences? How well do we make sense of our experiences? And that will have something to do with how we approach and how we adapt to situations. Manageability. Do we have the ability to access internal and external coping resources and use them when we need them? And how well we've done in the past will determine our future manageability. How do we manage or cope with stressors? So can we make sense of it? Can we manage it? Meaningfulness. He thought this was the most important. That's why it has an asterisk. Our ability to emotionally make sense of demands and to perceive them as challenges rather than burdens. Is there a way we can see a larger meaning in what happens to us? Can the meaning bring a sense of uplift in the midst of adversity? So no matter what we're going through, can we find some sense of meaning in it? Can we manage our emotions, and can we adapt? Can we cope? And does it make any sense to us? And meaningfulness goes a little bit with comprehensibility, but it's sort of larger. It's like, can we look at the big picture of our lives and find some sense of meaning in what's happening to us? So he defines SOC as the sense of coherence as a global orientation that expresses the extent to which one has a pervasive, enduring, though dynamic feeling of confidence that one, the stimuli deriving from one's internal-external environments are structured, predictable, and explicable. The resources are available to meet the demands, and the demands or challenges are worthy of our investment and our engagement. So that's how he explains that SOC. So I'm going to have to finish this little bit up and then finish up week 2 in the next video just because I'm on kind of a timing thing. So I'll be back.